Hey y'all, howdy folks. I'm here in video or YouTube. I don't know what you want to call it, but I'm not physically there because I yet again have pink eye. I think maybe question mark, but we'll see. Anyway, your due now today is to talk about how could Korea's location geographically impact Southeast Asia. So, if you're looking at the map there, Korea is highlighted in green, and it is located in the center between Japan and China. So what role or impact would Korea have on these two areas? So pause me now and try to answer it. And you're back. So now, hopefully you would have come to the realization that Korea is going to act as a land bridge between China and Japan, allowing culture to transfer from one location to the other. And that's called selective borrowing, when Japan selects certain things about China's culture and then uses it for itself while getting rid of some of the other things. So for example, it will take on an appreciation for nature and an honoring of education, but it will not select the civil service exams as a task for their government. All right, moving on. All right, so this slide is a little bit of a synopsis of where we've been. So yesterday we talked briefly about how the Mongols advanced into China, and eventually they would bring the use of gunpowder and cannons. Kublai Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan and would come into China and get rid of the Song dynasty and set up his own dynasty called the Huan dynasty. Eventually the Mongols are going to decrease in power after Kublai Khan dies, and the Chinese will regain power and set up their own dynasty called the Ming dynasty. And the Ming dynasty will reinstitute all of China's cultural traditions that the Mongols tried to get rid of. So when the Ming bring back all of these ideas of Chinese greatness, they're going to actually flourish and have a golden age. They're going to fund the arts, literature, schooling. They're going to fund exploration. And Zheng He, a famous eunuch and explorer, is going to go on several expeditions, which eventually will lead to the Chinese believing that they don't really need to continue funding exploration, and they will close themselves off to the rest of the world, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the year. The Ming Emperor will then, again, as I said, ban all naval technology, and this is right around the same time as the Europeans actually begin technologically advancing in exploration, and soon after the Chinese stop funding expeditions, Columbus will be funded and he will find the New World. So historians argue that there might have possibly been a time that the Chinese, if they didn't stop funding expeditions, they possibly would have founded the Americas before Columbus had. Now, if you're in my 7th period class, you'll probably notice that I skipped a couple slides. That's because yesterday we didn't get as far as my 5th period class, so you missed a lot about the Mongols and the empire that existed across Asia. So I'm going to ask you guys to just keep moving forward, and I will kind of sum up with you what was going on there. So for those of you who didn't get the lesson on the Mongols, they essentially were a tribe living in the steppes of Asia, and they were able to unite a lot of the factions that were nomadic still, and the leader Genghis Khan would unite these nomadic tribes and conquer all of Asia by using a system of basically show us tribute or die. So places could continue their cultural activities as long as they showed tribute to the Mongols. So essentially the Mongols were a tolerant group of people as long as you showed them tribute tribute and respect. If you didn't, then they just pretty much raided, raped, and enslaved your people. So there's that. Now, going on and moving towards the relationship between China, Korea, and Japan. There's a concept called selective borrowing, which we'll get to in a moment, that, again, I discussed in the Do Now, where Korea allows Japan to select certain things about China's culture and use it to develop their own. So in Japan, because of its geography and it being very mountainous, the Japanese people were hard to unite. They were made up of clans. However, as time went on, the first dynasty and only dynasty in Japan was called Yamato. The Yamato clan would bring in a lot of the culture of China and unite Japan to the best of its ability, but eventually the Yamato clan will cease and Japan will go back to being consisting of a bunch of clans. And one of the highlights of Japanese geography is definitely its mountains, and besides creating obstacles to unity, it also creates obstacles to farming. And one strategy that worked for them was something called terrace farming, where they created almost step-like looking features into the sides of the mountains that allowed them to cultivate and farm. Here's the selective borrowing concept I was talking about. That's why when you look at Japan and China, there's often very much a lot of similarities in their architecture and their respect towards nature and, you know, inferior, superior roles. But Japan discarded certain things about China that it didn't feel fit their own needs. One belief system that Japan developed on its own through their respect and honoring for nature is called Shintoism. So although Shintoism doesn't have a feel of having a monotheistic God and a Bible, they do feel like there's some sort of force out there that provides this beauty in nature, but also this fear that nature could bring on to its people. Believe it or not, Buddhism continues its spread beyond China and makes its way to Japan. And it mixes in with Shintoism, and a new branch of Buddhism gets created called Zen Buddhism, where it's almost like even more of a hippie-ish kind of style of Buddhism, where they believe that people should declutter their mind and be compassionate and empathetic. There's some contradictory things about it because they also agree in having the samurai there to protect them, which means they're going to be killing people. But that's just kind of Japan working in with its own features. So at this point, I'm going to stop with the notes, and I'll come back and explain some of them to you. But what I want you to do is on a sheet of paper, and you're going to hand this into the sub before she gives you the reading, you're going to take out a piece of paper and list it 1 through 10 and say whether or not you agree or disagree with these statements. When you're done, you hand this piece of paper in to the sub, and then you could read to find out whether or not you guessed correctly.